Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador, and welcome to my review of Sony's FE PZ for Power Zoom 1635 f4G. Now, when the rumors of this lens were first leaked, people in the forums were saying, well, do we really need another 1635? Hasn't Sony already got a couple of these lenses? So let's first address this issue. Of course, Sony do have a 1635 Power Zoom, only it costs 4 times as much and weighs 4 times more than the new 1635 f4G. Now obviously the one on the right is a cine lens, so a lot of people won't even be aware that this Power Zoom is actually available for full frame E-mount users. There is of course another Power Zoom that people who need a Power Zoom might also be considering, but this is also a hefty lens, as you can see from this PZ28-135 f4G. Now it doesn't reach very far into the wide angle realm, so one could say that a 1635 Power Zoom is actually needed in the lineup. Now of course, if we compare this to the 1635 f4ZA, this is a Zeiss design lens that has been out for quite a few years. Now the new f4G is going to come in at around about 10 or 11% more expensive than that Zeiss lens, and I'm working with approximate prices at the time of announcement here. But of course that GM lens is 33% lighter than that Zeiss lens. Now Sony have really started learning how to create very lightweight lenses given the aperture and zoom range that they're using. Now if we compare the G Master with the Zeiss design lens, you can see that we've got a lot more features. First of all, they both share a focus ring and a zoom ring, but on the G lens we also have an AF/MF switch, we have a power zoom, we have the custom button, and we have an aperture ring. But as well as that, we also have a D-click switch and an iris lock. The iris lock is used when we put the aperture ring into A and then want to control that aperture from the dials on the camera. And just because it's a power zoom lens, we're not forced into using that power zoom switch because we do have a zoom ring as well. So let's take a look at in more detail. As you can see, the dimensions here are really quite small, impressively small. As soon as you pick one of these lenses up, you're going to say, wow, there's not a lot of weight in this. At just 3.5 inches long, 88.1 millimeters, and with a girth of 3.25 inches or 80.5 millimeters, it is certainly small and also lightweight. It takes a 72 millimeter filter thread. Now if we compare that the weight size with a prime, for instance, I'm a big fan of Sony's FE 20mm f1.8G lens, we can actually see that prime lens is a little bit heavier than this new zoom. Now I'm not going to say that this power zoom is going to outperform that 20mm at the 20mm, and of course we have a wider aperture on that prime, but for people who need the flexibility of an ultra wide angle zoom and need that wider 16mm angle of view, then certainly there's going to be a few people looking at this new power zoom lens. Now if we look at the form factor, it's not out of place on Sony's compact full frame camera, the Alpha 7C. So as you can see there, it doesn't overwhelm the Alpha 7C, which I primarily use with the smaller prime lenses. And of course the FX3, the cine camera, is also similarly small, and again that's a nice form factor for that lens to go onto that camera. And of course if we put that onto an Alpha 7 IV, okay, it is going to look quite small as one of the primes I was just outlining earlier. Now of course we have the 3 rings. We have the focusing ring, the zoom ring, and the aperture ring. Now you obviously don't have to use one or all of these. You can of course use the autofocus, and you can use the auto aperture, control the aperture from the camera side, but it does give flexibility for those photographers who need it. So it is certainly compact with that 3-ring control for focus, and it's surprising how little weight this carries having all of those additional features. It has 4 XD linear motors for precise quiet zoom control, and as we can see there in this diagram, those are the new linear motors. Now I'm not a videographer as my primary profession. I'm a stills photographer, so I'm fairly new to power zooms. There's very few, of course, in that full frame lineup, as I showed earlier, so it doesn't take a lot of skill to actually create a variable zoom with that power zoom switch. A light touch will have you zooming very slowly, and a fast, a full implementation of that power zoom will have you zooming very quickly. And of course you can control the zoom speeds in the menus of the camera. So I just wanted to showcase a slow zoom using a light touch to that power zoom switch, and as we can see, that is a slow, steady, progressive zoom going from that 16mm angle of view right out to that 35mm. Now of course we can go even further if we have clear image zoom also implemented, so we can go more on the zoom if that is what you're wanting to achieve. Now I've created 3 minutes of little zoom clips. Now you have to give me a little bit of slack here. I'm new to a power zoom, and I'm fairly new to sort of doing these video clips at these events, which are usually covering using stills photography. But I'll just show you a little bit here, and then I'll add a full 3-minute segment of just me zooming during various clips, so you can see how steady and progressive that zoom control actually is. So as you can see, that zoom control does give you a certain look to the style of imagery you want to create, and obviously that's a lot more progressive and slow and even compared to turning the zoom ring on the lens. So of course, being primarily a stills photographer, I did want to showcase the stills performance as well. So here is the lens at 35mm focal length at maximum f4 aperture, and if we turn our attention to the corners of the image, that top left hand corner here, you can see we have very impressive sharp detail at that 35mm focal length. Really quite impressive, I have to say. This is straight off a JPEG capture, reasonably unedited file as well. So if we take a look at the 20mm focal length, now it's very impressive, and you're only going to see a difference between this lens and maybe using a prime at f4 if we actually zoom in 1:1. So although this detail isn't as impressive, we do have to zoom in. So unless you've got an 8K monitor or are printing very large prints, you're not going to see the obvious difference between using this zoom lens compared to Sony's 20mm f1.8G. Of course, if you need those extra wide apertures, that prime is going to deliver on that front. So here we are at the 20mm focal length at maximum aperture, and again if we zoom into, in this instance, you can see again we've got respectable sharpness at that 20mm focal length. And of course what most people will want to see is it still sharp at the maximum angle of view, that 16mm focal length. Now there is a little bit of barrel distortion uncorrected. Obviously if we're shooting JPEG or movies, the in-camera corrections is going to take care of that. So you're going to see no curvature of vertical lines. So this is a JPEG capture with in-camera lens compensation applied. If we take a look at the raw file, you will see some curvature on those front stumps. And of course we're still waiting for that lens profile to arrive so I can accurately take out that distortion on a raw file in post-production. So that is something to be wary of. You will need those profiles for full correction at that ultra wide angle of view. And of course as we zoom in, you look at the detail on that front stump, and it's respectably sharp for a zoom lens. So I think this will deliver not only on a video front but also on a stills front as well. Let's take a look at the two XD linear motors for responsive AF, and of course all of Sony's recent performing lenses have those XD linear motors. Of course they've got to keep up with cameras such as the A9 and Alpha 1 camera now, so we do need that fast responsive AF. So of course I'm going to a sports event like a triathlon, which I shot this weekend. I would normally slow the shutter speed down to get some creative movement blur behind the speeding cyclist, but of course this is showcasing my skills in my ability to pan accurately with these moving subjects, so that's not a great test for the autofocus capabilities of the lens when you have rapidly moving subjects. So what I decided to do was have a 3/4 angle of view onto the cyclist coming towards me and let the camera track that and freeze the motion at 1/2000th of a second. So now this will highlight any sort of focus inaccuracies that the camera might have. We're not really relying on my skills as a photographer to pan accurately. So as we look at these, you can see we have really good performance, and this has tracked this cyclist over a sequence of 10 or 11 images, and they're all sharp. And as we look at these images, and I'll give you a link so you can look at 4K examples on my Flickr Pro account, so I would recommend that you view them on a large 4K monitor to see that the focus is indeed very accurate and fast on this lens. So many examples, it very rarely if ever missed, and of course on some occasions it would pick up the eye of the rider and then zero in on a specific point of that speeding combination. And as you can see from all of these, they're really more than acceptably sharp. So as this final image shows, he's obviously detected that I am using the new lens, so he's giving a shock and surprise expression, or maybe he's just wants to be on camera posing. We have, as a wrap up to this, we have those XD linear focus motors, internal focus and zoom. So if anybody's mounting this on a gimbal, that might be an important point. There is the lens does not extend when we focus or zoom, and we have apparently reduced focus breathing. Now I haven't had time to test that, but of course, and I was also using it on the Alpha 7 IV camera, which has a compensation for focus breathing, but I'm reliably informed that the focus breathing is minimized on this lens because it is designed for photographers who do want to shoot a lot of video as well as stills. It's also got a respectable close focusing distance of just 0.28 to 0.24 meters. That's 0.92 to 0.79 feet. Obviously the variance there is depending on the focal length that you're using. So Sony have released MTF charts, but it's really hard to compare what this lens is doing with Sony's previous MTF charts for the 1635 ZA, because in that intervening time Sony have changed how they're measuring with the MTF charts. They used to measure in 20 and 40 lines per millimeter, and now they're measuring in 10 and 30 lines per millimeter. So I'm going to let people who follow me bench test this so you can see exactly how sharp it is compared to previous 1635 lenses. Now if you're wanting additional support, I do have camera specific ebooks for a whole range of the Sony Alpha cameras, right from the A7 III right up to the Alpha 1 and Alpha 7 IV cameras, and you can download these books by joining my Patreon site. I also have active Q&A forums. I have over 20 hours of member only seminars, and I also have cam set files. So if you own a camera such as the Alpha 7R4, the Alpha 1 or the A7 IV, you can set up your camera exactly the way that the ebook guides you by just loading a cam set from a memory card. And as I said, I will conclude this with the full 3-minute video of me doing various clips. Now I was shooting handheld on an Alpha 7 IV and just using the power zoom, so there's no tripods or monopods involved, and I'm using the active steady shot mode on the Alpha 7 IV. Okay, so thanks for listening. I'm Mark Galis, Sony Imaging Ambassador.